The man born to be king. In days of old, there lived a king who ruled a wide empire. He was rich and powerful and spent his days in peace. One day he held a festival. During the feast he saw a little gray-haired man, whose face he did not know, sitting at the table. Feeling that there was something strange about this man, the king summoned him before the throne and said, "You seem to be a wise man. What do you know that others do not know of?" "Nay," replied the old man, "do not ask me that, O king." But the king insisted, and at last the old man spoke as follows. "You deem yourself to be safe upon your throne, O king. So you are. But after you, your line shall come to an end. The next king shall be no son of yours." When the king heard that, he was very sad. Shortly afterwards, the king one day went hunting in the forest. At nightfall the king lost his way in the dark woods and had to pass the night in a shepherd's hut. The shepherd had a little baby boy, and the king, who had no son, envied him. All during the night, the king had fearful dreams that the shepherd's boy had grown to be a man and had become king in his place. In the morning when the king woke up, he could not help thinking that this child was the one that was fated to succeed him on the throne. The shepherd had gone out to his work, so the king lifted the innocent baby and carried him away. Soon he met his men looking for him. He told one of his followers, who had served him faithfully, to make a wooden box, place the boy in it, and float it down a river that ran through that part of the forest. He did at once what the king had told him to do. When the king got back to his palace, he found his queen had given birth to a child, but he was sad that it was not a son. 14 years passed, and again the king was hunting in the forest. During the heat of the day, he stopped at a mill beside a river and asked for wine to drink. He was served by a handsome boy, whose features he greatly admired. When the king had drunk, he called to the miller and said, "Thank you for your wine, my friend. Is this your son? For he seems unlike you in his features." "That he may well be," replied the miller. "Michael is not my son. 14 years ago my daughter found him floating in a wooden box on the river." Then the king, remembering what he had done 14 years before, was troubled. His face grew dark and he shuddered. So he rode away. He was now thinking how to get rid of the boy a second time. A few days afterwards, he sent a servant to the miller. He had orders to go to Michael and tell him that the king wished to educate him at court. He was to pay the miller a large sum of gold. But the king had commanded his servant to take the boy to a lonely place, and there to murder him and hide the body. Michael left his home willingly enough. The two went along merrily, till the woods grew wild and lonely. There the servant suddenly turned and stabbed Michael. But he was so overcome by the horror of the deed that he did not stay to see if he had finished his work. He set spurs to his horse and rode back to the palace at full gallop. On arriving at the palace, he told the king that the lad was dead. Surely, thought the king, when he learnt this, I am safe now. 7 years more passed, and still the king had no son of his own. So, as his daughter was grown up, he determined to marry her to a neighboring prince. Just at this time, the king was visited by a band of monks, who were attended by a company of soldiers. When the king came out to welcome them, he thought he had seen a ghost, for one of the soldiers was certainly Michael, whom he believed to have been murdered 7 years before. Calling the young man, the king questioned him, and heard the whole story. The boy had not been killed by the blow he received. He was found, wounded and unconscious, by one of the monks, who took care of him and nursed him till he was well. Hiding his fear and anger, the king invited the soldier to enter his own service. Then, thought the king, I shall find another opportunity to slay him. 10 days passed, and then Michael was sent by the king with a letter to the keeper of the castle of Rose, where his daughter was staying. He met the princess in the castle garden, and gave her the letter for the keeper. The princess opened it, but when she read of it, she turned pale, and looked at the young man with pity. It was an order to the keeper to put the bearer of the letter to death as soon as he arrived. The princess could scarcely believe her eyes. She looked at the handsome youth, and determined to save him from death by making him her own husband. So she told Michael to wait, and ran off to her room. There she burnt the king's letter and wrote another in its place, which she gave to the keeper. When the keeper read it, he was amazed. It was an order from the king that as soon as the bearer of the letter arrived, he was to be married to the princess. However, the keeper dared not disobey it. As for Michael, when he looked at the beautiful Princess Cicely, he had small wish to disobey. Therefore, a priest was fetched at once, and the princess and Michael were duly married. In this way did the Princess Cicely save Michael's life. Meanwhile the king passed a very uneasy time at the palace, wondering whether Michael was yet dead. On the 12th day he sent a message that the princess was to return. You can imagine how furious the king was when he saw his daughter and Michael walking hand in hand. They looked as fair as any pair on earth. He said angrily to his daughter, "What is this? What play is this?" Then Cicely, faint and pale with fear, replied, "My father, we have done as you ordered." And the keeper of the castle, who had accompanied them, said to him, "Sir, you gave command that the princess and Michael were to be wed. I have done even as your letter bade me." When he heard what they said, the king felt it was of no use fighting against fate. He saw that the very means he had used to get rid of Michael had helped him to become an heir to the throne. Evidently, he was a man born to be king. Moreover, Michael looked so young and handsome that the king felt that no king could be braver and stronger than he. Therefore he smiled and greeted Michael lovingly and welcomed him as his son indeed. Michael, the shepherd's son, and the sweet Princess Cicely lived with him happily for many years. And when he died, Michael became king in his place.